Our final speaker is Dereca Blackmon. She is the Associate Vice Provost and Executive Director of Inclusion and Diversity Education.
All right, as has been said, my name is Dereca Blackmon. I use she or they pronouns. I like to let you know what pronouns I use because you can't tell by looking at me. My work today is going to be called To Become One, and it is Prince and the Integration of Self, a reading of We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries. To thee from tortured souls arise, we sing, but oh, the clay is vile, beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. So when we talk about, I really feel grateful that they allowed me to change the order so that I could go last and center myself. And then, you know, Spirit has a way of working things out because I'm so grateful that so much was covered before I got a chance to come up. And it allows me to focus my comments a little. So thank you all for that compassion. So I want to talk a little bit about Black liberation theology and Prince and how it can serve as a frame for understanding his work and how it can talk about, as Camille so brilliantly gave us, his rootedness in Black culture. And then, you know, sort of all throughout this, we've gotten his broader style impact on his radical relationship with freedom and self-determination. And how does the split mask, as referenced all the way back to Dunbar, reflect the Black literary, cultural, and political discourse? So back in Manchester, I talked a little bit about, and thank you so much, Christy, for all that you've done to set some of this academic conference in motion, and D'Angela to take it up and continue to deepen and broaden the conversation, and all of you, as she said, for being here in the morning. So I started and want to start then with my personal journey from Prince. My first I first got introduced to the music of Prince by, like many of you, by my older cousins. So back in 1980, I was 10, and so not really allowed to be listening to what I was already listening to. I didn't get to go to the 1999 tour, but I did have the poster with him on the bed in my bedroom, and was just always hoping that I would get the opportunity that my older cousins got to go and see him. So in 1986, he came to Detroit, which is where I'm from, to celebrate his birthday, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that happened. And then he was actually carrying the suits. He's famous for a yellow suit he wore that night. People know and love that. And he asked us as an audience to wear black and white. So I thought that was a wonderful way to start this conversation around the two-ness that he embodied and then integrated. So we all showed up wearing black and white, and unbeknownst to us, a local DJ, who I'll talk a little bit more about, the Electrifying Mojo, who gave Prince his first live radio interview that night. So I'm coming home as a young 16-year-old on the way back from the concert, and after years of wanting to be able to touch Prince, I've seen him for the first time. We turn on the radio because everyone who loved Prince listened to the Electrifying Mojo, and lo and behold, by complete surprise, Prince is doing his first live radio interview. It was, as you can imagine, an amazing moment, really, to hear him talk to another human being for the first time, and to be witness to that. And so that starts and begins to deepen my journey with my personal experience with Prince. I'll tell a couple funny anecdotes that I always like to tell about the way we as a Black community owned him and the way we not owned, but claimed him. No one owns him, but claimed him in a way that was really resonant for you wherever you are at whatever stage. So in middle school, before I get to actually see him, my two best friends became my best friends because of their love of Prince. And we would sit around and talk about and have whole philosophy conversations about Prince in the 7th grade. And I remember one of them that was so profound was his impact on us and our spirituality, because we had never seen someone whose image embraced the spiritual and the secular in such a profound way. And I remember having a conversation with my friends Wendy and Lydia, who of course think they were the precursor to Wendy and Lisa. And we sat there and asked the very serious 7th grade question: do you think it's a sin that I would rather go to a Prince concert than church? So I thought that was a fitting Sunday morning joke for you all. And the second one involves my grandmother, because in our community, as Prince began to gain traction and visibility, we saw him as unmistakably ours. And so my grandmother, wanting to be sort of in the Prince vein, had decided that the way she would enter and claim him was through controversy. And she told me, she said, boy, I love that Prince, because that song, all she heard was the Lord's Prayer. That song, I really love that song he made, Count Your Blessings. And I was like, what are you talking about, Grandma? She said, count your blessings. So wherever you were, whoever you are, you saw him as yours. And so I'm grateful for that. So throughout the years, like many of you, I saw more live shows than I can count. I was, remember, I don't know how many of you know Sarah Bacon. S. Bacon is an amazing person who has loved and chronicled many of Prince's concerts in her years. I remember meeting her in Vegas at the Rio when he did his residency there, and I think it says somewhere about through the peephole, like literally 5 of us organized ourselves around the peephole because we could see him rehearsing. And I met Sarah, and I had heard how much she was a fan of Prince's, and I was like, yeah, okay, come with it, let's see what you got. I've been down since 1980. When did you start? And I was sort of saying, we talked about whether we had met him and when we had been on stage. And she said, really? She was talking to me about, I was talking about a concert I went to in San Francisco. And the way she won my admiration and recognition is she went upstairs and came back down with her computer. I had gone to a Ruby Sky show in San Francisco, and she opened up her computer and showed a video of me on stage at the Ruby Sky. And I was like, okay, you are the one. So those are the kinds of things that sort of drew me into a world of people who loved and celebrated him. We were joking last night. Camille said, is that you, Dereca? Because I said something about being a fan, and then I said, wait, I mean a lover of Prince. And that was because he didn't like the word fan because it was short for fanatic, and I see all the not fans nodding. And so the pinnacle of this, here's Electrifying Mojo. I really encourage you to go and listen to the soundtrack. But I really love what Chris talked about, because part of the reason why Prince loved Detroit and came and exhibited a lot of who he was there was because we had a DJ like the Electrifying Mojo. People see Detroit and they think about how black it was, and it was, but it was also a place where all kinds of musical influences came together. So not only did Electrifying Mojo break Prince in a major market like Detroit, he also broke Kraftwerk and the B-52s, and there is not a Detroit techno head who doesn't tell you how deeply their music was influenced by Prince, Juan Atkins, and all of those folks. But what Mojo would do was he would play whole Prince albums all night. And the reason he was able to do that was because he bought his own time on the radio. So he had his own time, and every time Prince released an album, he played the entire album. And so we were familiar not only with Prince, but all the associated acts. And he was playing Kraftwerk and all these people. So part of the reason why Prince loved Detroit and came to celebrate his birthday with us was because we were a Black audience in front of which he could be all of his musical selves. And so my understanding of Prince being rooted in the Black tradition is less because of my academic bona fides, but more because of my personal experience of being around the breadth of the Black experience my whole life and never thinking of anything, any music, any educational, any economic achievement as outside of who we were, because I grew up in what I like to call the Wakanda of the United States. And so, so my personal experience culminates in this flash mob that I helped to throw in Detroit for my birthday. And this is Shelby's tweet about it. It was a one of the first, or Prince says one of the only, the first flash mob that was ever done for his music. And it was a benefit for Yes We Code. My friend Van Jones had begun to work with him more deeply, and this is the folks who turned out. We ultimately covered the entire street that night, that day, and then he tweeted and talked about us that night. And so I've always been that person who just did my own personal tribute, whatever that was. And so it is completely astounding to me to be at this place in time where I am on an academic panel about Prince. So I will get into that. I teach a class with Dr. Adam Banks at Stanford called Contemporary Black Rhetorics of Prince. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So part of what I think we're trying to resist in this idea of centering Prince is a little bit of what folks call the white gaze. And in that, this is a quote from Robert Palmer in 1981. He says, "The fact that the white rock fans and radio stations have tended to banish him to the Black music ghetto, says more about racism in contemporary pop music circles than it does about Prince's songs or his presentation." Now, what's going on here is that Robert Palmer is actually trying to give a compliment to Prince and say that the industry is really the reason why he has been banished to the Black ghetto instead of being accepted more widely. But this is an example of the white gaze because the construct of Blackness here is a musical ghetto instead of a musical fountain, which is the root of almost all forms of music that are American. And so we heard from Chaz in Manchester that Prince was very clearly centered in his Blackness. He grew up in a Black community like my own, where there was all kinds of Black people playing all kinds of music, and all kinds of white people playing all kinds of music, but he never saw music as outside his cultural tradition. So I wanted to just offer that. And here's Lenny Kravitz talking about that influence. He looked like me. I could identify with him. And I had this big imagination of where I was going to go. So he said to us, Blackness is more than what people tell you. It's more than a ghetto. It's me and you and all of this. And he wanted all of the audiences that saw him to see that, but not all did. And so for Black liberation theology, it's about dismantling top-down institutional structures and erecting a bottom-up paradigm of faith and learning. And this, too, is Prince. And so here, when we talk about Prince and liberation theology and Batman, we see that he's always integrating the spiritual. So what happens in this two becoming one is, although he's embodying in Gemini the Batman and the Joker, what you see in the video for Batdance is who he is as a musician is neither, right? And so this is that integration of self. This is the character, and this is the artist. And so I think we have to always understand, and I love what Chris and Karen were talking about, is that this was the performative, right, of him saying, Andre Simone, who my family still teases me because I loved Andre Simone first. And they're like, you don't like Prince, you like Andre Simone. But what they're doing here with the characters is trying to draw your attention. But what they're doing with the music is trying to deepen your understanding. And so what we love about the style is that it was always transgressive. It was always saying, I am more, you are more, see more complexity. I tell my students all the time, complicate the narrative, right? And so we needed to complicate the narrative of Prince and what we're seeing without losing who he's being in terms of what we learn from the music. And so I love how D'Angela has put this together so that we can talk about the music, we can talk about the style, we can talk about all these pieces and still see them as an integrative whole. And so here's what Dr. Cohn, who really brought the term Black liberation theology to the fore, says, religion has been that one place where you have an imagination that no one can control. And so as long as you know that you're a human being and nobody can take that away from you, then God is that reality in your life that enables you to know that. And so what is it about the Black spiritual tradition, whatever religion or not religion you are, that Prince draws from so deeply to retain a sense of his humanity, being transcendent not of Blackness, but of the limitations of humanity? It's transcendent in a way of embodying a spirituality that was big enough to embrace all races, all genders, all iconography. And so that is what he was doing. Testimony is an integral part of the Black religious tradition. It is the occasion where the believer stands before the community of faith in order to give account of the hope that is in him or her, I'd add them. Right? And so this is Prince. This is his call and response. He never did anything without saying, come on and answer with me. And this is the Black church tradition. And so last night I came in here and was rowdy. And that's because that's my culture. That's my tradition. And I love and respect cultures that sit in silent admiration. But that's not who I am. And that's how we knew by his style, by his motivation, by his presentation that he was one of us. And so what happened is that from that one of us, he invited everyone else in. Black and white, brown, and it doesn't matter. Come on and party uptown, which is this continual vision that he creates in everything he does of a utopia where all are included. And so I think I want us to understand that the broadness of what Blackness is a place that's inclusive of all people. And if we really just went, I'm a history major, if we really just went into the history of all people, we are all descendants of that great culture. Right? That's the first human beings on the earth. And yet we disintegrate into a lack of understanding of how all of us can be one in this broadness that he creates. I won't go through all these quotes, but Des Dickerson and other people have talked about the importance of spirituality in the conversations in the band. And Prince's drive, he says that he felt responsible to share a spiritual truth. So he does this in the way that he wears the crucifix. He does this in that the symbol of integration becomes not just, his name, it's the love symbol. It's the symbol of, these are ancient, when you look at this is the Eye of Horus, right? These are the ancient symbols that come together that were religious symbols in ancient Egyptian culture. And so I want us to not situate his iconography outside of religious tradition because it was so deeply important to him all along. I'm going to skip some of these because I've got about 5 minutes. James Cone said, you are more than what has been defined for you by society. And who else could we say that about more than our beloved Prince? He just said, I will not. And the conversation I've talked with Jeff Chang and other folks who have written and talked about Prince, the conversation is often that Prince rejected Blackness. I was so grateful for what was said before. He rejected the ghettoization of Blackness. He rejected the idea that you could just bring him anybody Black and he would like it just because it was Black. He was excellence. He was excellence, if nothing else. And he knew that within the Black tradition, he could reject anything that wasn't excellent and be okay with that. He could reject anything that was limiting him and be okay with that. And if Black folks wanted to limit him and not play his rock music on their radio station, then he didn't want to be there. And if white folks wanted to limit him and not play his funk on the radio, then he didn't want to be there either. But The white gaze says y'all was going to play all his funk because that's what happens, right? This is the blues. This is funk. These are the traditions that undergird all. I mean, when you talk about the people who say they are influenced by him, they're every color. They're every musical style. They're every style. Sorry, let me stay with what we're supposed to be talking about. Okay. And so here's what happens. We look at him and we see not who he is, we see who we are. So if you look at this picture and you say, oh, he's so fine, he is. If you look at this picture and say, look at that sweet smile, it is. And if you look at that picture and you go, that hair is fierce, then you was trying to wear that feather at that time. This is more Cone talking about singing of freedom. And I want to talk about the liberation of Black people that he was involved in. There is sort of misunderstanding that this is only something that was happening later in his life. This is something that he was practicing for many, many years secretly. And that goes back to the Paul Laurence Dunbar quote. Will people be afraid if Black people speak of their Blackness? Will people be afraid if Black people are open about the ways they support Black communities? On the bottom right, this is Marva Collins from the Most Beautiful Girl in the World video. Prince was supporting her very early, and the excellent school that she created for Black children that had amazing outcomes for students who had been previously discarded. So I want us to understand that while we saw a lot of this later, it was going on for a long time. But why wasn't he able to present this kind of style, this kind of consciousness that was always there? Whether you're talking about Party Up was not just about a party song, right? It was always there, this level of consciousness. But what happened is as he gained prominence and his presentation gained prominence, he was able to express his political views more and more without having that pigeonhole him in a space where people wouldn't let his voice be heard. Okay. I think hopefully we'll still have some time for questions. Thank you so much for indulging me.